Hello lovelies, this is kind of addressed to the Brexit supporters out there, but the purpose isn't to persuade you that Brexit is a bad or terrible idea. Really, I think it's, at this point, anyone who's still pro-Brexit, it's an emotional decision for them, and that's not to be disparaging, you know, emotions are important. Rather, I've noticed a tendency for certain talking heads that have moved to the right, Sargon, to rather radically underestimate the damage that a no deal Brexit would do, and to present it as though this is somehow all fine. And it isn't. You know, the result of the vote wasn't, as we'll get into later, but it's not to persuade you, it's rather I want you to go into whatever happens next, and we still don't know, it's still all up in the air at the time of making this video. I want you to go into that fully cognizant of the costs and the issues associated with it. And you know, if you're still pro-Brexit after all that, if you want a no-deal Brexit after all that, if you're willing to suckle that up, at least you're doing it from a position of being informed. Now, I try really hard, don't always succeed, but I try not to dismiss Brexit supporters as stupid or racist or whatever else. I mean, I can't remember who said it, but they said that, you know, not all Brexiters are racist, but all racists are Brexiters, and I think that's largely true. But you're not guilty by association. Yeah, I struggle with it, but at least I'm trying. I'm going to do this in a kind of 3-act structure based on Aristotle's 3 artistic proofs. So ethos, logos, and pathos. Here we go. So by making an ethos argument, you're trying to establish your credibility to talk on whatever subject. Essentially, this boils down to an argument from authority, by establishing authority to speak about something which is fallacious, but still it may put people's minds at ease a little and be somewhat persuasive to know where I'm coming from. Now, don't let the accent fool you. Yes, I'm from the home counties, and I speak in a fairly plummy way, I guess, a bit more estuary English as I get older, but it doesn't mean that I am some middle class hipster or whatever else I've been accused of being in the comments. I'm too old to be a hipster, for one thing. I have been very poor, I have been better off. My parents, my dad was a teacher, maths teacher, my mum was a legal secretary, my dad transitioned to IT and we were a bit better off for a while there. My grandparents, a builder, primary school teacher, RAF secretary type person. Currently, income doesn't really rise to the level of middle class. Disposable income has to be pretty high for you to be considered middle class, and we're not quite there, but not that far off. I run a small business, but I suffer from mental health issues and am on benefits. So basically I've got a wide range of experience and a multiple set of points of view on everything that's going on. I've been poor, I've been better off, I've been on welfare, I've been unemployed for protracted periods. So, you know, I've been around the block, and despite the plummy accent, I'm not some cushied middle class namby-pamby pansy or whatever. I have studied history and politics formally, and I have a lifelong interest in them, and I never stop learning about these things because it interests me. You have sport, I have politics and history and mythology and so on. So I think that pretty much establishes that, you know, I'm coming at this from a measured and pretty well-rounded perspective, rooted in an historical and political grounding in how all of this works. So I think my perspective is a useful, good and measured one, and I think my voice is rather rare in its content in this skeptosphere, whatever you want to call it, that we all seem to have ended up in. Strange bedfellows and all that. The logos is an appeal to reason, to logic, just as ethos gets its name, or loans its name to ethics, so logos loans its name to logic. So a rational appeal to an emotional decision probably won't get too much traction, but in this broad community we're supposed to value logic over and above everything else, reals before feels, you know? Project Fear wasn't really Project Fear, it was Project Pretty Prescient. A lot of the things that have been said or were said in the campaign have proven to be true. Now, a lot of people dispute this, but on a somewhat spurious basis. I mean, it was claimed that there would be an immediate recession, and there wasn't, but there was a massive drop in growth and a rise in inflation and in costs everywhere. So that's kind of like someone crowing because someone else predicted that they would lose their entire leg and they only lost their leg up to the knee. Yeah, you were fortunate, you were lucky, but there were massive negative financial impacts on the country, on people, on individuals, on yeah, you name it. There was a massive bad effect. Things are now less stable than they once were in Europe. Some of that can be blamed on Brexit. Some of it probably can't. It was stuff that was already moving. But yeah, it doesn't help, you know? And this was a lot of experts speaking. And for all Gove might have dismissed experts as logical, reasonable, rational people, we should, to a degree, listen to experts, listen to our technocratic elites, because they are the ones that know and understand the best out of all of us what's going on. And it can be wrong, it does happen, but they're the experts, the people who know and understand these complex things and structures that we probably can't know that much about unless we're specialised in those arenas. So I think it's worth understanding and noting that experts were against Brexit during the vote. They continue to be against Brexit, but most especially against a hard Brexit, which they all say will be ruinous. Now, there's always a few outliers, but by and large, every expert in business, politics, you farming, you name it, they're all lined up against it. And that should at least give us pause. There was a fairly precipitous drop in the value of the pound after the vote. And there will be, as and when we believe, in whatever form, but worst of all in a no-deal scenario, things are not going to be okay in that instance. Experts from the CBI and others estimate that the pound could drop in value by 10% or more, possibly even as much as 17%. And this will have a knock-on effect to ordinary people because your pound will buy less, you know, particularly when it comes to imports and so on from other countries. So the cost of living will rise. At the same time, there's unlikely to be a positive pressure on wages and so on, and if there is, that'll only further fuel inflation. So we're looking at a hit, a big hit, like wiping 10% off your income, essentially, probably more in effect because of the knock-on effect on taxation, inflation, and so on. So look at your salary and ask yourself, am I willing to lose 10%, maybe as much as 17% in the short term, and 10% over the next decade or so, because that's what's estimated. And a lot of mileage was made out of how much the EU costs, but we get a lot out of membership of the EU. After all said and done, I think we were paying about 9 billion per year into the EU, but the CBI again suggests that 5% or more of our economy benefits massively from the EU. So our membership in the EU is worth about 78 billion, so they estimate. I think that's an upper estimate. It was between 60 something and 78. Yeah, that's a big number compared to the 9 billion we save by being out of the EU. So in real terms, a no deal Brexit would cost us 50 to 60 billion after all said and done. So we're not going to be better off. That 350 million for the NHS or whatever else, whether you believed it or not, that's purely illusory. We are going to be in the shit so far as the economy is concerned. The EU is worth a lot to us, indirectly and directly. There's going to be a massive impact on science and education. These two fields are almost completely unified against all of this. Universities rely on student tuition, a lot of that from people who come to the UK to learn, because we have a good education system, and in a lot of former Commonwealth countries, that's considered a good education, and we get a lot from Europe. So taking us out of the EU doesn't only create a negative impression on potential EU students, but more internationally. It says that we're a closed, insular nation with a hostile atmosphere, and it's likely to be a much less pleasant place to live once the impacts of a no-deal Brexit, if it went ahead, are felt. So the universities have come out against this, particularly a no-deal Brexit. And scientists have come out against it because a lot of funding comes from the EU, a lot of projects are joint projects with the EU, and we lose out on all of that. We may lose access to more ready sources of important medical equipment, of radioactives, all sorts of things. We're going to lose access to the rival GPS network, all of that, which we've already sunk a whole bunch of money into. So we've always been good at innovation and education, at least at the higher level, and that's all under risk. The ability of British scientists and innovators to succeed is going to be massively impacted. And that's kind of where all the money generation comes from these days, biotech and innovative tech solutions, which we've traditionally been good at, but we're going to make it much harder for ourselves to succeed in that way. So you can expect universities to close, scale back, go bankrupt, have less worthy education, and the worthiness of a British degree internationally is likely to go down over time as well, and we're going to cripple our ability to be an agile, tech-oriented country. You might think it's worth it. I don't think it is. I mean, some of that's a sunk cost fallacy, I guess, but it is essentially throwing away money. Inflation, they think, could hit 3% or more, as much as 5%, and this is likely to hit the poorest hardest, especially as they've got little flexibility left. And these things, the cost just to survive has a certain level, and once you're richer, more of that becomes truly disposable income, not just spent keeping you treading water. When you're poorer, even a small price hike can have a massive effect and can take you from coping to not coping with just the tiniest of changes. A pound to someone who has £1 million doesn't mean much. A pound to someone who has £100 means a lot. So this is going to hit the poorest hardest, as much of this will, which is ironic because they tend to be the people that voted for Brexit in the first place. It's likely to be even harder this time around if we go into a no deal Brexit, because there's so little flexibility left. Household debt is huge, and there isn't much room for anyone to take more loans, and our banks and our credit rating as a country and all the rest is likely to be hit. There's no palatable solutions to the problem. So there's going to be suffering, and we already have record numbers of people using food banks and so on. So that is going to hit people very hard. Also, as we go into this threat of a no deal Brexit, we don't have China to buoy everyone else. Their economy is slowing and may go into a small recession after a while. It's just unsustainable, their levels of spending and so on. So essentially China can't bail out the rest of the world if there is another great recession. I mean, this would hit us hard, it would hit Europe less hard, and it will have a global knock-on effect because we're quite a big, rich, powerful economy. But we won't be so much after all this. Now, going back to the poorest in society, which a lot of people say are the ones who've driven Brexit and stand to gain the most and had the least to lose, well, they still do have things to lose. The EU has often been the only source of investment in these communities, these broken, impoverished communities. Our government couldn't give two tugs at a dead dog's cock for these communities, and they're unwilling to spend the money or the effort to do anything to help them. And I'd say that's ironic because the EU does a certain amount of wealth redistribution around the European Union, and we have some of the richest areas but also some of the poorest areas, which is very unusual for a country. And a lot of the social investment that goes on in these communities only comes from the EU. And if you think that's going to be replaced by our government, especially if it remains under the Tories, because Corbyn's botching Labour's approach to Brexit, you got another thing coming. I mean, when have they ever really done much of that in the past? And with the purse strings tightened, who are they going to take care of first? In their Westminster bubble, as people like to say. Immigration was a reason for a lot of people, and a lot of reason that, poorer communities apparently voted for Brexit. But the demands of the economy are not especially going to change. I mean, even in a massive slowdown that is likely to happen, we still need all that labour that is currently being provided by Eastern Europeans, Romanians, Polish, all the rest of it. So where is it going to come from? It's not going to come from our own communities, or if it is, the prices of that labour is going to have to rise substantially, which is going to apply more inflationary pressure. Do you want to pay twice as much for a punnet of strawberries? It sounds silly, but that's what it comes down to. Because we don't have the native labour willing to work, able to work in sufficient numbers to do this without either drastically increasing the wages, even though strawberry picking can earn £14 an hour, which is above minimum wage, there aren't the people to do it, so crops may well rot in the fields, as has happened with the crackdown on immigration in the US. So we're going to have to get that from somewhere, and if we're not going to be getting it from the EU, we're going to have to loosen immigration rules for non-EU people, which were tightened a while back, which did a lot of nasty things to families and so on. So either we do tighten our immigration and we fuck our economy even more, or Brexit will ironically result in us loosening certain degrees of immigration. It remains to be seen, but either way it's unlikely to have the effect that a lot of Brexiters want, just purely due to the realpolitik of economics and farming especially. The NHS is going to be hit really hard. I mean, there's been some good announcements recently about focusing more on preventative care and so on, but a lot of workers in the NHS are immigrants. We don't produce enough doctors and nurses in this country to fill what we need. And if we were to try and do so, trying to push people into certain streams of education is very expensive and doesn't seem to have that much of an effect. A lot of the attempts to get gender parity in STEM subjects are a case in point of this. It doesn't seem to matter how much you spend or what speakers you get in. People just like what they like for the most part and refuse to be pushed into something that they're not interested in. So that's not really gonna work out for us without immigration. Like I say, practically every expert is against this, and while I recognise that sometimes they're wrong or they get the degree wrong. By and large, yeah, it's their job to be experts in these areas and to predict things properly. Are there market solutions to these problems? We can't really replace the amount of trade we do with the EU overnight with treaties with everyone else. Treaties take time and effort, and we're going to be in a very weak negotiating position, and we're going to be a country that can't be relied upon to stay with its commitments and hold to its treaties because we've left the EU. So we're going to be in a very weak position when it comes to negotiation. And like I said, raising prices on labour and so on to try and encourage British unemployed to do things just doesn't seem like it's going to work. So there's going to be any way you cut it, soft or hard, there is going to be a big economic impact, particularly from a no deal Brexit. And this is likely to hit the poorest, the most vulnerable, and the people who voted for Brexit the most. And I don't think many people will really understand exactly how bad it's going to be. Think back to the Great Recession, and that was about 3% loss of growth, and here we're talking about at least that, and possibly 3 times as much as that. I'm not fond of appeals to emotion, even though I tend to get quite a lot of positive feedback when I get quite passionate and agitated about things. I guess it's more watchable or something. I prefer the logos to the pathos. But lots of people seem to back Brexit from an emotional position, and that seems doubly true of those who are willing to go to a no deal Brexit, which is the worst possible in lots of ways for lots of people. And again, I want people to be cognizant of, what this means for people, and there is an emotional side to that, which I guess has to be acknowledged. There are a lot of European people living in this country who've settled here, who pay taxes here, who've married British people, or couples with them, or whatever else, who've made massive friendship groups and all the rest of it, and their future is deeply uncertain, especially under a no-deal Brexit. Now, the government has put forward a proposal that they can apply for settled status, which is something non-EU migrants can do. But they're telling them to apply to remain in a country where they've built their life, and as the result of a vote in which they had no say, and in which Brits living abroad had no say. And obviously this is massively stressful. I have dealt with the immigration service and their demands and stuff before. My partner's American. And it's massively stressful, it's expensive, and it's thoroughly opaque, especially when it's a new system like the one they intend to put in place. Lots of people are going to be very upset. Lots of people who are planning to be together have had to revise their plans. So is this what you had in mind when you backed this? Did you want to split up marriages or engagements or families, as could well happen? I mean, there's no guarantee when you apply that you're going to be allowed to stay. No one's being grandfathered in. And this runs the risk of splitting up families, as previous tightening of non-EU migration has done. This is going to have a massive emotional impact. Or did you not mean those kind of immigrants? Did you have a specific kind of immigrant in mind? Because laws are blunt instruments. They don't discern, they don't differentiate very well. I mean, my partner, American, not even a European migrant, she's noted a more hostile atmosphere and people saying things and then taking it back and saying, oh, I don't mean people like you. Immigrants, I'm going to have to appeal to Logos again, they pay much more into the economy than they take out. That's 1.1 to 1.3 times as much as they take out, they pay in, and they provide an important backbone to everything. These are people who've come over here and made their lives here and have committed themselves to a life in Britain. paid into it, found love here, and all of that is put at risk because of this. Is that what you wanted? It's even more at risk under a no deal Brexit, and the status of Brits in Europe still isn't certain at all either. I mean, just the stress is horrible of not knowing whether you're going to be allowed to stay with your partner, with your kids, with whatever else it might be. Whether you're going to be able to stay in this home you've made, and many of them have been here years and years, decades, and yet their status is still under risk. And think of the people who are going to be hardest hit by this. The poor, who many of you look to champion, the working class, who in large degree backed Brexit. These are the people that are going to suffer, and we've already got, like I said before, record numbers in food banks. Many more people are going to be pushed into poverty. Many more people are going to be pushed into homelessness, either directly by this or indirectly by the massive deleterious effect it is going to have on the economy. So you have to ask yourself, looking back on all of this, all that I've said, is this really what you wanted to happen? Are you willing to pay this price? The potential breakup of the union, the 10% loss to the economy, the breakup of families. Are you willing to accept all that for a no deal Brexit, to leave on WTO terms, which basically means none at all? Is it really worth all of that for this? And if it is to you, fair enough. At least you go into it understanding what's going to happen. This isn't Project Fear. This is experts in measured institutes and publications and so on making fairly conservative estimates of how bad it's going to be. And the government continues to fumble. I mean, in looking to prepare for what's going to happen with shipping, and just-in-time shipping is something we all rely on for the smoothly running and relatively cheap society we all live in now, they couldn't even organise a traffic jam of lorries in Kent when they tried. And these high-tech solutions to the border stuff, universal credit, which is a computerisation of our welfare system, was just pulled back and delayed. And you expect them to overnight just magic some new high-tech border control solution out of thin air? The government's track record when it comes to these things, modernisation, digitisation and so on, is not good. It's very expensive, and belts are going to be tight, and they tend to fuck it up. I mean, look, I sympathise with a lot of the problems you raise. It's just that I see that Brexit is the opposite of a solution to them. It's going to make most of these problems worse, much worse, and it's going to hit the poorest and most vulnerable the hardest, while being in the EU has actually helped them a massive amount. But if you're going to do it, go into it eyes open, and don't let people like Sargon piss on you and tell you it's raining. It's not going to be fine. It's going to be hard, and you have to ask yourselves if it's really worth it. Zang.
The police bring in reinforcements.
There was justice there, no poverty.